Hey everyone, I'm Saad, I'm a director at YAP Global and YAP's resident ZK enthusiast, and it's great to have you all here to discuss ZK in 2023 and the path forward. As you all are probably aware, ZK as a technology has been around for several decades now, but it's only in the past, let's say a few years that it's really started to kind of take a foothold within the Web3 and blockchain space and demand a lot of attention and a lot of hype. And it's quickly become one of the most interesting and exciting spaces to follow, really. That's why in this discussion I wanted to kind of take stock of where we are as an industry, and hopefully by the end of the discussion we can have a bit of a clearer idea of kind of the state of ZK today, some of the challenges that we need to fix in terms of enabling broad adoption, and then some of the use cases and applications that we can kind of aim for as a community, really. In terms of logistics, I think we'll have around 40 to 45 minutes of discussion, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So yeah, please have a think, and for any questions you may want to.
Hard questions only.
Yes, hard technical questions only. Cool, so before we dive fully into the conversation, I want to introduce everyone fully. Obviously you've heard from Kyle and Evan, but I also want to welcome Alex Pruden, CEO of Aleo, the world's leading developer platform for enabling absolute privacy in blockchains, and Hai-Chen Shen, co-founder of Scroll, a fully EVM equivalent ZK rollup built to scale the Ethereum network. So I want to kick the discussion off just taking that title and just learning a little bit more about the state of ZK in 2023. There's been a lot of attention in the space over the past few years, but do we need to temper our expectations? Evan, this is a question for you. Or is the ZK future truly here and it's ready to solve all of our woes?
I think it's here, but I think there's still some core technology still to be built, but it's not core technology that's a research problem. It's core technology as in we need more NPM style libraries that unlock key standard library style functionality for zero knowledge proofs. I think it's really mostly there from a core technology perspective, I would say, but I'd be curious if others have other takes as well on it.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the ZK is definitely here. You can see ZK that rollups has already been I feel in production, and then people are using ZK to build a lot of applications. But I also want to add is that I think ZK is still evolving. So there's a lot of new things coming up with every day, every month. You'll see new papers, new primitives, new proving frameworks that are coming up that can further reduce the overhead of the ZK, and then making people also there'll be new open source software that can reduce the overhead, reduce the learning curve for people to write ZK circuits. So I think it's a very still a very fast, rapid, evolving space.
Yeah, I would say ZK is here. Mina has been live for however long. Zcash has been deployed, right? You can use certified proofs for payments. I think, as the technology matures, as it gets better and better, you'll be able to do more and different things. And I think, there's a ton of primitives that can be built for each of these use cases. And that's really the area that I would focus on is I think right now we have a lot of the foundation for people to start building applications. And frankly, what I really want to see is I think the ZK Ignite is a great initiative. At Aleo, we do some, but in general, I think focusing on developers to build real world applications, what would a user use a zero knowledge proof for, which will drive standardization, which will drive more optimization, which will drive the creation of these libraries, and then everyone can use and get that flywheel going. I think that to me is really what is we're in prime time for.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll have that discussion about application, but just to keep on infrastructure, so obviously one of the biggest storylines from this year has been around the ZK EVM, and seen the launch of a variety of ZK EVMs, ZK Sync, Polygon. Hai-Chen, just could you give us a brief overview of what's the state of the ZK EVM race, and what's Scroll doing that's different?
Yeah, actually, I think ZK EVM is an overused word. Everyone call upgrading EVM a ZK EVM. So I would say so there are a few the types of the ZK EVM. So for us, we're building the fully EVM equivalent, the bytecode level equivalent EVM into the ZK circuits. That's what we view the ZK EVM. But you can also have other approach trying to say if we can transpile the solidity code or the intermediate language representation to different VMs. That's kind of also what like the ZK stream does is trying to just do the transpile. So you need to have like a different compiler stack than the source C, like the standard compiler you're going to use, and then you can compile to a different VMs. And also, like from the Polygon ZK VM, they're trying to do like they compile. They first like build a small assembly language, like a ZK assembly language, and then they're trying to implement the EVM on top of using the assembly language. For Scroll, like we're taking a more direct approach in that we just taking the EVM specs from the external yellow papers, and then we implement this opcode by opcode as like a gadget inside the circuit, so that you can have like a very fully transparent like translation from the EVM execution trace to what happened inside the circuit inside the ZK EVM.
Perfect, great. And just kind of bringing you in, Mikhail, on that point around the ZK EVM and
apparently I don't need one.
If the ZK LLVM that you kind of discussed in your presentation, how does that fit into the whole ZK EVM race? Is it, if you can code with C++ and Rust, how does that fit into to that world?
It's like the way it fits into this whole thing is it's basically used by, we have like some projects which are trying to use this as the way to produce EVM circuits by basically just compiling the original EVM implementation. It takes some efforts to be done, I gotta admit. I mean, it's not that painless as we would like it to be, but it's doable. So that's basically like a tool for producing ZK, that's a tool for populating VMs, ZK VMs, whatever, populating circuits for it. That's what it is. Does that? I mean, yeah. Okay, that's basically it.
Okay, cool, that makes sense.
Can I add?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I think like so the ZK LLVM is definitely a very interesting approach that the people can just write any like language they already know, and then we can trying to compile the EVM complete using the ZK LLVM like to get some ZK circuits. So I think like that there will be, I would say like there will be lots of more works like optimization to do like to make the generated circuit to be very efficient. For like manually, like when we write the ZK EVM circuits, we need to manually do a lot of optimization to contain the overhead. Yeah, I think we're good with that. Yeah. Yeah. So I would say like definitely it will be an interesting approach. Like if we have seen more and more contributions and optimization coming up like into this approach, and I would imagine like maybe in the future and one day you can just don't need to write a ZKM circuit yourself, so you can just using the compiler stack.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of interesting work generally to be done on compiler architecture for snarks, right? I think it's interesting to have target this middle layer, like this intermediate representation, and you can synthesize the circuits themselves, right? But there's different representations of these circuits. You have RBCS, you have pairs, and like so. You can make some choices about how your compiler does those things, and potentially, if you optimize for just one stack, you can do it more efficiently. This is kind of the trade-off, right? So right now we're in the place where there's a lot of different approaches, right? Trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all solution is possible, but comes with the trade-off potentially of performance, right? So if you choose to focus on, for example, just the EVM, right, you can just say, okay, we're talking about these opcodes, and you can make potentially slightly more. You can make efficiency gains on that. But again, this is why I get back to like, what is the point of all these different systems? Well, they're all offering different performance trade-offs, but what are these performance trade-offs in the context of an application, right? So this is why we really need, I think the industry really needs like feedback from the market about like, this is what's demanded, and that will drive, I think, a direction for further development of the underlying infrastructure. So I hate to keep coming back to this, but I do think these two things are tied. And I think maybe just my commentary is like, for a long time, I think the focus of ZK has been, there's a lot around research at the level of the protocol. And I was really excited this year. One of the reasons why I think this year is a real turning point for ZK is like I was just in ZK Summit in Lisbon, and it was the first time I've been there, and the majority of the talks were about applications, not new proof systems with clever names, right? Like, so it's great to come up with clever names for proof systems, but like now there's really applications, right? So at the end of the day, like that will be what drives standardization at the infrastructure level.
Haven't been there, but finally.
Yeah, exactly. Finally, yeah.
Okay, great. I just want to change gears a bit and spend some time talking about the things that we need to fix urgently as an industry, the things that might be improved. So that's just how we're going to enable this broad adoption and these applications and use cases that everyone wants to see. Mikhail, I wonder if you could if there was something that you could fix, one magical way to fix something that's stopping the broad adoption of ZK 10, what would it be?
To be honest, let's go. Okay, it's like to be honest, I would have fixed two things. first of all, manual circuit implementation. Please don't. It results into like a lot of circuits issues, and the next series of hacks, like for example, previous year's series of hacks was mainly dedicated like to bridges and all the things. Well, this year, maybe like next year, we'll definitely see a lot of hacks around like badly written circuits, which is, well, it's going to be like a pain in the ass. And I hope everybody in here, including us, have done enough of audits. Please let's do enough of audits. So that's one of those things which has to be fixed, before everybody will be sure that this can be and should be used.
Well, I think you can also address that from a different way, right, through formal verification. I think that's a really interesting up-and-coming area around formally verifying circuits that are synthesized as part of gadgets, potentially, right? So I don't know, you guys may have more to say on that, but I think that way you can ensure that your snark is correct by construction or your program is correct by construction, and you won't have to worry about a hack. And hacks, in this case, are especially dangerous. Does anyone remember the Zcash inflation bug that may or may not have ever been exploited? This is a bit of ancient history, but there was an inflation bug in Zcash, and no one actually knows if it was ever exploited, right? This is why it's even more dangerous in this system to have a bug, but I don't know, you guys may have more to say.
I can come up with that. So I think definitely for sure the security and auditing is very important things to make sure the ZK circuit is sound and then complete. So that I think also the auditing is not one-off effort. So just having some auditor to look at the code and have a stamp on that, and then use your code that will be secure. I think it's just an ongoing effort. So you need to do internally keep reading and adding more test cases. Even I think formal verification that's that's possible, then it would be very great to guarantee that. So I would come with a different point for the things I think need to be fixed. Is how to make the ZK prover to be more accessible to more people, so that you don't need very beefy machines to run a cluster or a supercomputer to generate the proof, and then to make the proof generation time latency to be within the acceptable rate. So I think, for example, a new proving system that require fewer CPU RAM to run your circuit, sometimes FFT-free proving systems that can boost up the performance, and then making so everyone have a home computer, a laptop can generate some proof to generate the ZK proof. I think that would be something we want to fix and then to see, and then so that we can having more ZK applications in the future.
I mean, I think if I could set my finger, formal verification would be high on the list, but making that actually real would be so awesome. I think it's something we should probably do. Another thing came to mind though around, we have all these different proof systems, and each are kind of most efficient with particular pieces of cryptography. And they're not fully compatible with each other for that reason, and they're not fully compatible. It takes they may be only a little bit slower for normal code, but if you're putting different cryptographic primitives inside of a zero knowledge proof, they can be way, way, way slower. So if I could, having this perfect interoperability across proof systems and cryptographic primitives would be very cool, I think, and very useful in space.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So security and interoperability, I think, are things to keep in mind. Okay, cool. So I want to move the discussion on to developers. I know Mina does a lot around kind of bringing people in. So everyone on this panel wants to see kind of more applications and use cases. How are we going to open this space up to more developers? Evan, do you want to take that first? Let me
Sure. I mean, I think there's really two things. One is more applications. We need, more people to be understanding both ZK and understanding a particular area of knowledge deep enough they can start actually building, having clear ways to connect the tech and build it in real life, and that driving everything else once we have all that real momentum and market activity. So that'd be awesome. I think the other thing though is just making the actual tooling more accessible to developers. I remember when we started, there was this library libsnark, which I don't know if people remember anymore, but it was just this very complicated C++ library. And now we're in a place where we have DSLs, we have things like SnarkyJS and TypeScript. There's all these different ways of building zero-knowledge proofs, which don't require you to go to a PhD in cryptography and understand the really low-level details. It's more like using Python or something now. So I think the proliferation of those tools will also help a lot, because it opens up so many more developers to zero-knowledge proofs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look even back 4 years ago, you had no choice but to hand wire. The hand wiring circuits, if that sounds complicated, it is complicated, right? So now it's like the developer experience. I think is pretty approximate across a number of different contexts to like what you would consider the standard web developer experience, right? You write some code, you compile it, and you say, okay, is this what I want? Yes. So I think it's much easier than having to think about it as a cryptographer. So that is definitely where we're at. But I typically cringe when people advocate for more education. I'm like, it's just got to work out of the box, and you shouldn't take a lot of education. But the one thing I will say that I do think is different from a traditional programming paradigm is like the way you write programs as a developer is kind of backwards in the star context. What are you doing? You're writing a circuit that you want to take some input from a witness and evaluate to true, right? So it's like you kind of have to start your logic going, okay, what do I want? What do I want to be true? And you kind of work backwards to construct your program and think about what does the user need to pass in this private input. It's a little bit different than just like writing a program in like JavaScript or something. You want to do like a little spinning circle on a web page, right? Like there you're like, okay, I want a spinning circle, and you kind of like make the spinning circle. This way you kind of have to reason backward. And I think this is why I think it's really important to do hands-on developer hackathons, or ZK, a huge fan of what ZK Hack is doing, and even like relatively specific against use cases. Hey, like we want to see people build simple ZK-ML stuff or simple authentication gadgets. And I think the real key is like focusing on these small things that seem like maybe trivial, but the nice thing about this, and if you think about the development of the web was not like the modern web infrastructure and all of the web applications we know and enjoy were not built overnight. They were just iteratively built, and layers upon layers of things were integrated together, one on top of another, and then pretty soon you have a really amazingly powerful system. I think like ZK and developers, I think, should start along that path. Like, let's go with the simple things first, and atop those, you can build more and more. I mean, even Ethereum started this way. The first smart contracts were not that exciting, right? But then because of the interoperability of that ecosystem, people could use those different primitives and build more and more complex things.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I totally agree with like what Alex said. So actually, in fact, when we developed the ZK circuit, so we're building like the open source and building with the community. So like everyone, so we're building like a lot of like primitives which will be very useful. For example, there's a catch circuit inside the ZK like CDSA signature. So those can be great resources for people to reuse those part of circuits. And then we're also trying to push for more a unified front-end language. Like we're using the Halo 2, so that people if they're using the Halo 2 can directly use the circuit, and then they can integrate with their own ZK applications that they want to build, and that'll be a powerful things to do inside the community.
Okay, great. Alex, I think kind of on that point around bringing in more developers and more education, how is ZPrize kind of helping to foster that?
Pitch me a softball. Thank you. No, so ZPrize. So for those of you who don't know, so ZPrize is an initiative that we were really proud to do with Mina, with several other folks throughout the space. I think 32 companies in total participated, including hardware companies like AMD, Samsung. And the goal of this was it's an industry-wide initiative to push forward the baseline open source implementations of some of these low-level cryptographic primitives with a specific eye towards making it work faster in different types of hardware, to a point that you made earlier. And they, to me, it's really important because I think there's a bit of a danger, with actually first the opportunity, right? So if we think about encryption on the modern web, I remember a time when using HTTPS was noticeably slower than using it and then making an HTTP request, right? And one of the reasons why it's no longer even noticeable is because the hardware, the instructions for AES, which is a critical algorithm for TLS, live at the level of hardware, like Intel CPU instructions level, right? And so that takes the overhead way down, right? And so yes, in terms of computational complexity, yes, it's more work, but from the user's experience, it's way less. So the goal for ZPrize was to say hey, yes, these are hard problems. When we had the Mikhail's slides, these are hard. Yes, it's hard, but if you make more efficient implementations of hardware, it can seem less hard. And therefore, it can seem more performant and a better UX, right? And so, but the important thing here, the risk is that one or two teams figures out the way to do this really well, and then captures all of that value themselves and says, hey, guess what? I'm happy to generate proofs for you for a small fee, right? But they own all of the knowledge around how to do that well and effectively, right? And typically, that's how most things in hardware develop, right? If you look at the hardware space, and as having organized ZPrize, I've had a first-hand view of this. Everything is protected by IP. Nothing virtually is open source, with the exception of kind of the RISC-V ecosystem, right? I think that would be a huge disservice to this space, right, where it's still developing so much. We want, there's always going to be people with better ideas or little optimizations. They're like, hey, this is faster, and I can build a business around that, and that's great, but you want to make sure the open source baseline stays good enough or high enough that it's accessible to a wide variety of people. Especially, I think to me, that is what will keep the space evolving. So we did the first competition last year. Z-Prize, I guess I should tell you what it is. There's a competition modeled on the X Prize. It's $7 million. Like I said, Mina contributed along with many others. And we had 22 teams compete, and we had 12 really good implementations, of various, for various low-level cryptographic primitives using different types of hardware like FPGAs, GPUs, CPUs, and even mobile phones, right? So making this, so now these primitives you can integrate right into all this with open source under a Z-Prize, GitHub repo, and you can integrate these things right in to your programs and make, use the fastest implementation for MSM, for example. So using a Nova folding scheme, now it's twice as fast as it would otherwise be, right? So these are things that are making it better for, I wouldn't even say developers, but users. And because it's a faster proof generation experience or a more efficient verifier experience, then now it enables these applications that wouldn't have otherwise been possible before.
Okay, sounds great. I want to stick to proof generation actually, and Hal, I'll come back to you, because I know that you sort of talked about the proof market, but just wondered if you could give a kind of a sort of non-technical overview of what that means, and how is that enabling, because I remember you mentioning kind of it being the first kind of crypto commodity that you can buy, sell, and speculate on.
Kind of. It's like I wouldn't say it's like the first one, but maybe like one of the first ones, because as far as I remember, somebody has made ETH block space a commodity before that. But anyway, one of the first ones, commodities. So yeah, it's kind of employs the same idea. It kind of employs the same idea that, well, you just gotta bring like market dynamics to something, and that will get optimized. Here we go. So that's basically the thing. And considering about Alex's considerations that the open source part of this whole thing has to stay on the level. So that means like there are use cases like on the food market, like Mina's use case, where it is explicitly required for everybody by everybody that the implementation to stay open source. And it's like, of course, there are folks which are not like willing to disclose what they have done, what they have optimized. I know a couple of them, and I honestly don't know what they have done. It's literally like, okay, they have done something, I don't know what. They're not disclosing what they have done. But the thing is, all of the rest of those, they keep the implementation open source, and we think think that it has to be like enforced, maybe even like on a particle level with some folks which would oversee that this is like still open source and like that's been doable. So yeah, it's basically like just introducing, it's commoditizing the proof generation, commoditizing the proof itself. It's applying market dynamics to what bothers a lot of us in here. So that's what it is.
Yeah, in the long term, I think proofs will be a commodity. Ideally, in the far future, I don't know, hopefully on your multi-roadmap, it mentions a future or multi-roadmaps. Like future where it's like, look, there's a huge marketplace, like I'm a prover, and it should be invisible to the user, right? You're doing an interaction that's sending off a request for proof, or you're generating your own proof, right? So I think that's like a world in which many, many more people can generate proofs at a much, much greater, or a much larger number, higher order of magnitude, then I think that's success.
Yeah, I think like for Scroll, we also view like that. So the prover is served as like a validator, it's like in the layer 2 space, because like you're basically like running like the once like the transaction has been processed by the sequencer on the layer 2, so it doesn't seem like that this transaction has been finalized. It's only when the prover generates proof like that to and then finalize and then verify on the layer 1. That means like that you seal the transaction, seal those blocks, and those transactions finalized on the layer 1s. So we want to see like that. So to have this more decentralized prover networks for us, is that everyone can participate in the provers and have like a more decentralized having the decentralization for the layer 2s to. And I think we want to push to lower the barrier for people to run a prover for the Scroll, so that more people can participate into the Scroll network, and then to become like a part of the network to validate all of the transactions happen on the layer 2.
Okay, great. So it's going to be like a commodity like oil or grain, and you can just buy and sell and ape into ZK proofs at some point.
Yeah, Bitcoin Hash. You can already people already write newsletters about Bitcoin Hash. hash is a commodity, right?
Yeah.
So ZKPs, I mean, that's the nice thing about this, it's kind of a useful commodity, right? It's like more like oil, where you can turn it into something. Bitcoin hash is kind of, I don't want to get into an argument if anyone uses Bitcoin maxing here, but like, you could argue, some would argue is useless, right, or less useful.
Cool. Okay, great. So I want to talk a bit more about the challenges and in particular some of the ways that we can make ZK proofs more kind of easily generated. And one of the ways is through hardware acceleration. Hi Tim, I just wondered if you could kind of give us an overview of where we are in terms of hardware acceleration of ZK proofs.
Yeah, I think like the hardware acceleration is like moving very fast. Like there's a bunch of the people also like the who participate in the Z Prize, like they having those FPGA solutions trying to really reduce the proof generation times. And also I think the good things like for the ZK, like the proving systems, that they have like a few basic primitives, like MSM, which stands for the multi-scale multiplications, and FFT or like the NTT, like it's like FFT in a fixed point calculation. So those kind of primitives, like if people, the hardware company accelerators can do like a very well in either FPGA or like later in the ASICs, so that they can reduce the overall latencies of the proof generations for the ZK proofs. But like I think like there will be some additional things like we're experiencing like not only by optimizing those MSM and FFT like very well, you already solved the problem. There's like some new coming problem. See like how to accelerate the circuit witness synthesize like those processors. After you solve the problem, the MSM and NTT, then the problem becomes like how to fit in the circuit, how to synthesize the circuit witness, like become much faster. Could be like the next problem to solve for the hardware accelerators.
And if I could just jump in quickly, because my view on this is, so I both organized the Z Prize and so see a lot of work people did that, but also at ALEO we have the part of our consensus mechanism, there is an aspect of work there where improvers generate proof to get part of the Coinbase reward. So we had a huge amount of interest, as you could probably imagine, from a lot of people that hardware that was no longer useful for mining Ethereum come onto the ALEO test network, right? And I think there you're starting to see some demand or some interest in developing specialized hardware. But hardware specialization, like people talk about ZK ASICs, and it's, I think I would caution everyone to about that, because I think an ASIC is application specific. So it's like a ZK is not an application, it's a technique, right? So that said, you can have hardware that's maybe a little bit more specialized or friendly to the specific primitives that ZK uses, but an ASIC is really going to be built around a specific application that uses ZK. I mean, potentially you could see an ASIC being built for ALEO's POSW circuit, right? It's a specific size, and therefore there's memory requirements, etc., that uses a certain percentage of MSMs and FFTs, but not all of these snarks are the same, right? And so an ASIC, that's just a good point to remember, is like there's always, just like I was talking about around compilers, there's this trade-off between generality and optimality, right? In hardware, different than compilers, it's $100 million to get an ASIC, right? So you need a market there, and there needs to be applications with a TAM of that or really much greater to have that specialized hardware. Now that said, FPGAs and GPUs are getting very good. In fact, AMD at ZK Summit announced that they're coming out with a new generation of FPGAs at the 4 nanometer process size, which is basically cutting edge, that's optimized for cryptographic applications, right? So they're kind of like pushing forward the general purpose hardware. And this is kind of, so I personally anticipate, I mean, you may differ, but I personally anticipate GPUs and FPGAs will continue to be relevant for long to come. And I think only around the use cases that have a lot of adoption will you potentially see ASICs.
Oh yeah, I have like a different point of view, for this like the ASIC things. I do think so first of all, I don't think like the GPU will go away. Like the GPU will be still a very general purpose things, like it will be very powerful for accelerated ZK program. But I do think that there will be a ZK like the ASICs coming up in the future. It doesn't have to be tailored towards certain applications. So you can think you can implement those primitives very well. So I think take an analogy of the machine learning space that Google built a TPU, but that TPU doesn't mean like you can only run one type of those deep learning models. You can run different type of things. You just need to build the premise well, like you have this well abstracted layer so that you can translate those operations into those instructions inside ASICs, then you can run this faster. So as I said like that, so for example, if you do like MSM with a list of the common elliptic curve very well, so that's already like a pretty powerful ASICs you can do and then support to accelerate the ZK proof generations.
Yeah, but who's going to invest $100 million to build the new chip? right? So that's the question, right? The ASIC, there has to be $100 million that someone puts in, or maybe 50, whatever, for maybe an older process node, right? I don't disagree with you that it can be done. I think the question is really, what is the market force that's demanding it, right? And how much better is it really than a GPU, which you don't have to invest $50 million up front to use? But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things play out. I mean, you know more about hardware than me, so.
Yeah, hopefully I think like the school will be part of the sources like pushing forward for the ZK ASICs. And then I do think like the ASIC have like a win over the energy efficiency over the GPU, and also like the cost for the manufacturing, versus buying a GPU card can be more cost efficient.
Yeah, if you amortize it out to enough units, of course, yeah.
I want to just finalize on some of the challenges, and in particular, everyone's favorite topic, compliance and regulation. Alex, I wanted to just talk about just the tension between
You're going to pick on me.
zero knowledge and what is privacy and compliance. How can different ZK projects strike the right balance between keeping information private and just making sure they're adhering to regulatory requirements?
No, I love this question because to me it's very straightforward. By the way, this is like my background. I used to be an investor. I was at A16Z. I saw a lot of projects in the crypto space. A lot of interesting stuff going on. But to me, like zero knowledge cryptography, the ability to keep things private but enforce some kind of rules inside of the circuit, you have some kind of mechanism to reveal data that about something but not other things like that. That tool is what will make blockchains actually usable for the real world, I think. Like this is what will unlock Web3. Not only Web3, but it potentially transforms the authentication, like how we think about authentication today in Web 2, right? In a world where these models are being challenged by the proliferation of large language models that can outsmart a lot of kind of like the way authentication is done today, I think it's like zero knowledge is the key here. So I actually think this is an incredibly powerful tool for compliance, right? So you can have your cake and eat it too, right? You can have, let's take a simple example of a stablecoin, right? You can have a stablecoin, and you can say, hey, you can only transfer the stablecoin to people on a whitelist, or people, let's just do USDC, not on a blacklist, right? So, yes, there has to be a central authority that says, hey, this is the blacklist, like today that's OFAC, right? But all of that logic can live inside of the circuit, right? And so then I can send money to Ben or to Evan, and then like as long as my address is not on that blacklist, which is a proof that I generate client side potentially, like then that transfer just goes directly through. Now, what is the advantage to the regulator? Well, two huge advantages over the existing system. One, they know for a fact that no one is sending money to anyone on the blacklist. And if you think I just want to emphasize how much better this is than the existing financial system. 99% of money laundering and financial crimes go through banks, and they are caught after the fact. Like it's not correct by construction. It's completely a matter of checking afterwards, right? So not only do banks have huge compliance departments that cost millions of dollars a year, they also miss 99% of the actual crime, right? And so this is a system where it's like, hey, you can save yourself all these compliance departments. You can introduce, now of course you're not going to get rid of the whole compliance department, like you can introduce this concept of a cryptographic proof that says, hey, I followed the rules, and I've transferred this asset privately to all of the interacting parties in the system, right? So you replicated the existing financial experience, or like the UX of like I send Evan a bank wire, and Mikhail can't see Evan's bank account, right? Like that's how Ethereum works, and it's crazy, and it will never scale, at least in terms of the UX, to the real financial system. So not only is it like the only way that Web3 will ever become part of finance in my view, but it's also, I think, will be demanded by regulators. It's like, hey, this is a way to make us be able to enforce the law easier, right? So there's of course a trade-off if you want complete privacy, and there's a bit of a philosophical argument to be made around like, hey, what's too practical? What should be revealed? What should the rules be? And that's a social construct that's going to differ by country, but that's already how it works, right? And I think to me the key is like, by building platforms like Alio, or like Mina, or like these other kind of programmable, ZK EVM, these programmable layers where you can say, hey, look, you decide what your compliance protocol is, and then you encode that, and then you let everyone into your system, and then everyone can just generate proofs based on those rules. And then that is a light years ahead of where it even is today. I don't think there's a tension at all, sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, cool. So hopefully that gives everyone an overview of some of the challenges that we need to solve, but I want to shift slightly onto use cases, as it's just generally quite useful to have something to aim for and kind of the real tangible benefits for all of us, kind of how is it going to impact our lives. So Evan, I just, personally, what are you most excited to see? I know you kind of mentioned it in your presentation, but is there anything that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see a lot of cases where people want to bring identity, they want to bring existing information on-chain, but they can't do that right now. And zero knowledge proofs lead to a way to actually integrate that data in a way that is, publicly verifiable but private, and that's like super exciting. I think that's like kind of a big category of things. I'll mention one in particular I think is exciting, and like I think it's like something we need in any case, and like as LLMs and AIs continue to become more and more used by special interests and by nation states and everything, having some proof that I'm a real person without revealing my personal information seems really useful to show that I'm not actually one of 10,000 LLMs spun up with a special interest to have a particular viewpoint on something online. I think that's like one that I think is exciting and I think probably needs to happen in the next 6 months or so, but there's just a bunch of ways this can be useful.
And Mikhail, just very quickly on the intersection of zero knowledge and machine learning, kind of how do you think that's going to work, and what's ZK's role within that?
There's actually quite a lot on that intersection happening, and that's also relevant to Alex's considerations regarding the privacy thing. Is there's one thing nobody actually thinks about, but it's kind of yet to be done, and I think it kind of will affect as privacy and as ML model stuff and things like this, is cryptographic obfuscation, guys. Or you're gonna hate my take on that, but you're gonna hate my take on that. But it's about it's about not only hiding, it's about not only hiding the fact of something, but it's also about hiding the way of something happening. And this is exactly, for example, the reason for J Street or Jump Street or whatever folks getting up and running their own data centers, which are being secured by private militaries or something like this, for somebody not to access that places to retrieve their strategies or to retrieve the way they're doing things. And it's not kind of possible. It's a different kind of privacy. It's a privacy which is in circuit privacy, which is baked into circuit. It's not that traditional kind of privacy that everybody talks about when we mention in all the proof system stuff. And that's since all of those trading models, all those behaviors, things like this, are in most cases defined by ML models and things like this. Again, it's the intersection of literally everything, the holy grail of hiding the way you do things. Not only the fact of something, but hiding the way you do things. For example, again, a lot of processes, industrial processes, they actually have to stay hidden. Because it's intellectual property and things like this. So that's what it is. That's what should be there, and that's what lies on the intersection of ML stuff, privacy stuff, and all the proof system stuff. So, and nobody for some reason actually talks about it. I know why nobody talks about it, but come on, let's do it.
Well, I think if I can just add on to that quickly, I think there's another slightly maybe related aspect, but this concept of, I think, a lot of people talk about, ML, so I think proof of humanity in a world where there's LLMs everywhere, obvious use case, I totally agree with that, and that should, ideally we would have had that 6 months ago, but hey, here we are. But I think there's another one where even if you say, generally I think LLMs are amazing, it's an amazing technology that can be used for bad or good, but I think it has a lot of positive potential, but I think in the future it may become necessary to know cryptographically that the answer that you got when you typed something into ChatGPT is actually from a specific model, right? Let me give an example, right? So, imagine you're a civil engineer taking advantage of an LLM to design and build for an architect, right? And you say, hey, I want to, design, I want to build a building with these specifications, draw me it up, something. Something like a critical application, like how wide a beam is, right? You're probably going to want some assurances that the LLM that you have been given, which is most likely proprietary given the data that it has to ingest for training, you want to make sure that that inference that you got is provably from that LLM that you're paying the license for potentially, right? So you can have this these inferences, right? There's two aspects to machine learning. There's the training and the inference, right? Prove my model is trained under certain data or with certain data with certain characteristics. That's kind of the healthcare use case. What I'm talking about is the inference side, where it's you ask it a question, I get an answer, prove that answer came from an element or this element, right? And I think for certain high, like the use cases where it's very, very critical that the answer is of a certain character, I think you will demand that cryptographic assurance. And I think that is a use case for a zero knowledge proof.
Yeah, definitely. Very quickly on DAO governance. Obviously voting IRL is private by default. How do you think zero knowledge is going to impact DAO governance?
Yeah, I mean, it was the facts we mentioned on like the roadmap we showed earlier. I think it's like super important, and I think ZK has a really important role to play. If people are really going to vote their minds in these systems, we're going to need ZK to have some privacy on their actual votes. And if we're going to be having votes by very large numbers of people, like not just like 1,000 or 10,000, but even more than that, we're going to need ZK for scale as well to put all those votes together into one system. I think also a lot of this it's exciting that's happening in DAOification, systems that are more complex than simple binary voting. And if you want to do those on a blockchain, even more need all the scaling technology. If you want to do like sortitions over choosing people from like a large set, or you want to do some quadratic voting thing, or you want to do some kind of mass conversation that takes place in a verifiable way on chain. All those things you start even more needing the scalability stuff for. So I think DAOs have like so much potential, and I think as they evolve, all the privacy and scalability stuff will be essential to making it happen. Yeah.
Also, like adding like, a little bit like on that is like I think so the ZK like already people are building like a ZK voting applications. I feel like that combined to the topic previous day, you also should like combine the proof of the humanity from like you need to prove like you're a human being behind for that vote instead of like a model like to make that vote. I think, and if you combine this like a proof of humanity and then with some privacy, like kind of like a ZK identity versus like the add up combined with the ZK identity and then the ZK private voting, that would be like I think a huge use cases for the ZK that governance models.
Great. And then just finally, obviously ZK has had its clearest applications in the blockchain and Web3 world. Just wondered whether there was any areas outside of crypto and blockchain where ZK could be applied. I know you obviously mentioned ML, but are there any others? And Carl, do you have any thoughts on that?
Even ML use case can be applied to all this crypto stuff and outside of crypto stuff. It's like there is an aspect which is relevant to ML, but not to crypto stuff. If, for example, in case folks need to train like adversarial models, and they need to quickly exchange the data they've been trained on, and that usually it's been done through just like plain text, something you just send like a couple of petabytes, something like okay, just grab this couple of petabytes. Is that a problem for you? Yeah, come on. So that usually becomes a problem that slows down this training. So if folks actually introduce like the compression based of all these proof systems with like for data, which is being used for like adversarial models, that might even, for example, like enhance the training performance of those things, and that's like that's just the first example which comes to my mind. I mean, there are actually like several other use cases have been surprisingly, which were surprisingly brought up yesterday to me. But no. Somebody wants to take on that as well, because these are pretty unusual. I have in my mind.
I can mention one. We've been talking to some like larger companies that have private databases, and like those groups are very interested in producing proofs that says like, here's a proof about something in my private database, even though I'm not sharing the actual database itself, or like regulation, compliance, privacy issues. They see these cases outside of blockchain. That's just like they have a private database they want people to share. But then what's interesting is they often then start seeing the advantages of interoperability with other projects, with decentralized systems once they start going down that path. So they don't necessarily show up at it from like a blockchain lens, but they often land there, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, if I can build on that, I think the cool thing about this technology, these applications, like you just mentioned one, identity is another one, but like it kind of very neatly bridges what we call like Web 2 and Web 3. And like honestly, guys, if we're still calling it Web 3 in 10 years, we've lost. Like it should just be the web. Like ideally, all this technology is integrated in the infrastructure of the web that we all use, and is transparent. to everybody, right? But like another example of a use case that I think Mary's is using is like you can verify a digital signature inside of a snark. Now, depending on the curves you use and a bunch of details, it can be more or less efficient, but bottom line is you can take a cryptographic signature from an email, let's say, and verify that in a snark. Actually, one of the projects that was really cool at ZK Hack was somebody created an atomic swap between US dollars and Ethereum by putting up an escrow contract, and that escrow contract would send ETH to someone, or once a proof was submitted to the contract that said, hey, I received a verification of a signature from an email from Venmo saying like, I sent you this amount of money, this is the right amount. And that's had nothing to do with blockchain, right? It's an email from Venmo that's digitally signed, but that signature can be used in a zero-knowledge proof and connect with Web3 in a way that's really cool. And TLS Notary, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with this, I think it's an Ethereum Foundation grantee that looks at a whole bunch of these use cases. I highly recommend you check it out. I think it's a really, really cool intersection. And in general, I think there's a ton of overlap between Web 2 and Web 3, and I think this will be the bridge between those two technologies.
Okay.
Yeah, also like adding,
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, like adding like one more use cases, like you can prove the authenticity of certain things like that. For example, the photos you took, like that, and then if there's like a chip inside of the camera, then you can prove that, generate a proof like for that image is taken at a certain place at a certain time for that pictures. And then even after you make edits like to that photos, you can still like generate a succinct ZK proof to that prove that the edited photo is actually derived from the original photos that you took like somewhere. So because like right now like you have like a lot of deepfakes, those models like faking a lot of things like from the AI models. So I think the proof of those authenticity like it's like a huge use case for the ZK in the like non-crypto world.
Yeah, absolutely, and like proving when those photos were taken also has massive use cases in the media and social media as well. So yeah, I think that's totally agree on that one. I think that's a great point to leave it because I know that we need to wrap up soon. So if anyone has any questions, I think we've got sort of 5 minutes of time. Yeah, sure.
Should I just speak?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think it's more of a question on the app side of things, which you guys talked a little bit about. I think one thing that's kind of interesting about the space is thinking about how programmable privacy might add different things for the app experience, right? So from the user experience perspective, like how does being able to send a transaction on chain but having all that data completely private, but still retaining the ability to like selectively disclose things, like how that changes user experience a little bit. So I think one thing, maybe a question to Alex first, and then maybe Evan see your perspective, but maybe like could you go into a little bit like how does the like on-chain like data model work in Aleo, and like how does like the viewing key come into play, and like if in a case where someone's using a particular application and they want to selectively disclose information that to prove something, like how does that differ from actually using this view key that can kind of like basically decrypt all your data?
Yeah, so great question. The first thing I just wanted to say is that there's a lot of just depends on what the application is and exactly what the requirements are, but trying to keep it in general. And so first specific about the Aleo protocol. So there's 2 types of quote unquote view keys in our case. You have the view key that you can reveal that reveals the content of a specific transaction, and a graph key that reveals all of the transactions, not their contents, but the to's and froms for a given account, right? And so you can imagine this potentially, you as a user, I usually think of this more in terms of like compliance potentially. If you had an operator that's running a payment system and maybe like the low-level people had access to a graph key, you could have an ML, data scientist running clustering algorithm, like, this is shady. Someone with like a higher up has like a view key, they could like, that way you can kind of separate these things and have kind of a kind of operator-driven model, less decentralized, but an operator-driven model for like a stablecoin system. So that's how those come into play. Now that said, I think for the use cases, and when I think about the applications, like maybe tweaking or reframing your question or like taking it a slightly different direction, I think for me, I don't necessarily see the view key coming into play as much for the user directly in applications. I think what you will do is you'll have applications that are written about. So what does data look like on Aleo? Maybe going back to your question. It's encrypted records, right? So you can think of these as UTXOs, but like richer in terms of what they can store. And so these are all encrypted records that can be decrypted only by the account holder, right? So that's the account that the records associate to, only that address, only that public key holder can decrypt, right? Now I can prove that I can decrypt it, I can prove facts about that data, right? And so I think what this means is the TLDR, the punchline is personalization, right? So like there's, right now if you go on the internet, like everything about you, all of your interactions on the page are captured, and we've kind of just all gotten used to that. And most of the time no one cares, but like for certain applications, like imagine a health app that runs on my Apple Watch, right? Like there are certain things that I just maybe would be more like, I would maybe give more permissions to an application that therefore can give me a richer experience if I knew I had fine-grained control about exactly how that data was being used and where it was going, and only if it's like, I'm gonna open this window, but not this window, like that, I think. So I think really to me, it's like, this programmable privacy enables personalization. And that's how I like to frame it. A lot of times, people are like, you gotta protect your privacy because like everyone's stealing your data. And like, look, that's true, but that's like just a negative outlook that is kind of depresses everyone. But I think there's like, the reality is like, you can build new kinds of applications that are more personalized. They're just tailored to you, and like you don't have to worry about any of this. It's like, of course, it just enables these new paradigms for personalization that I think will really change consumer applications specifically.
Just showing like specific on like user flow, because I think we were touching on that. Like, what we kind of expect to see is wallets will not just have tokens in it, but also attestations and facts about you and your wallet, and that will be like part of what is stored in like your personal information there. And when you go to websites, the websites will, similar to how they can request MetaMask to send a transaction out, they can request, I want a proof of some fact. Here's like the KYC providers I trust, like I want a proof that you're registered with one of them. And it'll spin up your wallet producing a proof that gets sent back to the website, which then gets used to get back to the actual blockchain. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's maybe what the user flow might end up looking like for these pretty shortly.
So like a form of selective disclosure is proofs.
Yeah,
proving X or proving Y.
The point about the browser is a really good one because I think a lot of people, I think wallets are great, but ideally like the more integrated with the browser of today is really important. Browser-based wallets, I think, are the future, and the more transparent, the better. But I think why, going back to Z-Prize, we had a category around WASM, generating proofs in WASM. Like specialized hardware is great, but you also want to be able to generate them in the browser, and there's like that's its own challenge. But I think we've made massive strides to doing that more performantly. And even it's very practical today for smaller services.
Verify currency is an example of something we're talking about.
Yeah.
Verify content of verify currency.
Great, I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, sorry, you had one.
I first want to say thank you all for the wonderful panel. And my name is Jane, so I'm currently building my own startup, large language model powered data identity for developers. So basically everything you guys just talked about is pretty much related, because I'm about to start a research project with the Mina Foundation next month about identity in the whole like Web3 context. So I know that not everyone knows the word of Web3, but I do want to because account structure is obviously one of the interesting things, but I think DK identity will be the next thing for general identities in the Web3 space. But apparently, for my observations, a lot of the so-called DK identity projects are built 6 months ago or now, because I think the Mina Foundation, one of the PSE, have been started one of the DK identity projects a year ago, but they shut down that project. And then I have a really brilliant Stanford peer, which they were doing a DK KYC project, and I haven't heard any update from them for a really long time. So I was assuming that project also shut down. So I really want to ask, take the advantage of everyone. So for my startup and also for my research project, to see what will be some of the difficulty of implementing DK identity. And of course, we talk about use cases. Are we gonna have the use cases first or the DK identity first? And how will everyone see DK identity will fit within the ecosystem?
I can speak a little bit to it. Yeah, so I think it's super interesting. I think that a lot of the complexity is that you have to partner with a KYC provider, and you have to also surface this in a way that is relevant to the actual blockchain use cases at hand. There's a unannounced, fairly serious effort on this going on in the Mina ecosystem, which I think, happy to chat more about. I think it's pretty cool. I think though that solves for a more centralized identity solution. I think one thing I've been very interested in thinking about is, can you do decentralized versions of ZK identity that take advantage of social trust networks or other things that can provide some guarantees under some conditions, but I'd be curious to chat. I'm very interested in I think it's important, so I don't have an answer fully, but I think there's folks working on it, and it's important. So,
Yeah, I guess one high-level comment, maybe from a business perspective, is that, these just because companies fail doesn't necessarily mean the idea is bad. I mean, actually, my old boss, when I was in VC, used to say, like, there's no bad ideas, just early ideas, you know, and like, I think that may apply here, but I do think, specifically, I think I always look, the way I would think about it is like, what, for your startup, the way I would think about it is like, what can I build a capability that can't be replicated anywhere else, right? Like, and what technologies enable that, right? Because then that really gets to like what's differentiating. And for me, like a ZK-powered identity solution on a blockchain is what enables you to have this decentralized authentication model, where it's like an issuer gives me a credential, the U.S. government, I create a digital representation of that credential, and that, of course, by the logic of whatever program or contract, you verify that was signed by the issuer, and then use that credential that you custody, right? This is not like I ask Google to do OAuth for me, right? I custody it, and then I can authenticate to a service, right? That can't be done without a blockchain. Like it can't, like, yeah, you can do, you know, this is kind of why I think ZK and blockchains go naturally together. It's like if you kind of remove the blockchain from that, you just do ZK, like how is that better than OAuth? Google's the prover, I just send the proof to, I send the data to Google, and then they send a proof. Like from the user perspective, it doesn't really make a difference, right? But I think the difference for the user is that like you are the credential bearer, right? And that is a differentiator that I think would make better use case, but Mikhail may disagree.
Yeah. I got something regarding this. It's like there is a way to do like KYC without disclosing personal information, without public databases. I personally know a couple of folks who were doing ZK KYC, trying to actually like pre-train the model, and then to prove the fact that, like on a particular data, and then to prove the fact that the user's data was passed through this model, like through this model basically on the user side, then passing this proof back to the KYC request inside. That effectively proves the fact that the user has put his docs or like anything to the model, which was trained specifically to recognize docs and to say that okay, that works, or like it doesn't work. It's like it's just fake stuff, whatever. And that's like it's possible to be done without protocols this way. There's a pain in the ass about training the model, that way, improving this training, improving this inference, and it's like yes, it's a problem. There are folks, I know such folks. I mean, they're experimenting. They're like proving some PyTorch and Compass or something like this. But yeah, it's very experimental, but it's doable. I mean, it's doable. I guess it all depends on which kind of KYC it is required, like to be done by a particular customer use or something like this. Because in case this is like about docs, well, this is the way I know. Hey.
Just wanted to add on the approach that we are taking.
Yeah.
So the approach that we are trying to take is do zero knowledge proof on the bank statements. Bank statements are already KYC verified. So for the government to go and to be regulatory compliant, you take a proof of the bank statement. So you'll be able to complete the verification.
Yeah.
So I can do a demo of that.
Yeah.
So
That's the case as well.
no, it's not proof that you want a bank account. So that's differential privacy.
Awesome, great. I think that's all we have time for actually. So yeah, thank you for the great comments.
Just one last question regarding formal verification of circuits. Like we see a lot of discussion regarding this, but it doesn't seem like there are many initiatives around this. If we're going to move like to a fully smart EVM state, it should be like formally verified, like we have the Ethereum kernel smart contract fully verified. But it looks like initiatives will only start popping up once you start seeing ZK hacks. Is this something that you guys are focusing on, working on, seeing someone like building it?
So I'll answer it for me because it's easy. So Aleo for Leo, so Leo compiles into Aleo opcodes, and those are gadgets that are effectively synthesize themselves into circuits, and that synthesis, we have a formal verification team that formally verifies each of those independently. So something we think about, but to your question, Aleo, the AVM is not the EVM, so I think you're right that only covers what we look at, but to us it's very important. But I have not personally seen an industry-wide effort, which is why I mentioned it earlier. I think it would be great to see.
There is no industry-wide effort. Okay, here we go. There is no industry-wide effort, there are experiments like, again, I can just speak like for what's happening around us, okay? It's like there are experiments about generating like talk statements from the KLVM's IR, basically because those folks are using like LVM backhand for the sake of generating those statements. So they're kind of like, okay, we'll just adjust that to the new IR and we'll just put it as a backhand. And so that means like, you know, putting that two-way, it's like it's like one backend generates like service provable to you, the other backend generates from the same IR you produce service for formal verification. In case you ensure this IR stays the same for both backends, this results into like automatically formally verifiable circuits. It's again, I don't know where would that lead them. But yeah, just a lot of things happening like that way, where I don't know where would that be though.
Thank you.
And I do see like that. So people do formal verification of the contract side. But like I think for the ZK, it's like a more experimental things. Like there are people doing the research and building the tooling. I think the tooling is like one important thing. Like otherwise you probably like the ZK circuit is already very complicated enough, so that you probably need to re-implement this in formal verification framework. So like whether like building the toolings to make that more automatic things like and to reduce the human effort for building this formal verified circuit. I think. But I do see like that there's coming up like some researchers like building those tools to see like how to extract the proof, like the constraint from the circuit into some of the formal verification frameworks like Lean or like some other frameworks using like the formal verification.
Yeah, by the way, this is an area that I would love to do for the next iteration of Z-Prize. So if anyone has suggestions about the prize category around formal verification for stars, please let me know.
Great. Well, thank you all for your questions and thank you for your